The war room of the FSS Resplendent hummed with the quiet energy of a dozen alien species, their varied forms casting strange shadows across the holographic display. Captain Ryan Blake stood out among them, not just for his uniform, a stark black and grey compared to the flowing silks and bioluminescent plating of the Federation officers, but for the way he stood, shoulders squared, feet planted. Human Commander Vexis of the Zepyrian delegation slithered past him, her scales shimmering with barely concealed amusement. "Ah, the soft ones have arrived," she murmured, her voice carrying just enough for Blake to hear. The other Federation officers chuckled, a chorus of clicks and trills. Admiral Krell, his massive Vorac frame taking up nearly twice the space of any other being in the room, gestured to the tactical display. The Vorac Swarm fleet has been sighted near the Typhon Expanse. Estimated strength, 3,000 vessels. The hologram flickered, showing the jagged, insectoid silhouettes of the enemy ships. Blake stepped forward. "Admiral, if I may, our analysts suggest they'll flank through the debris field near Vorac Prime. We should position our forces to—" Krell's mandibles twitched in what might have been a laugh. "Captain, with respect, your analysts still rely on projectile weapons." The word projectile dripped with disdain. The Federation has moved beyond such primitive tools. Vexis flicked a claw toward the display, her holographic interface weaving an elegant defensive formation. "Our energy shields will hold. The Vorac cannot penetrate them." Blake clenched his jaw. "They'll adapt, they always do." "Adapt," Vexis scoffed. "To what? Your bullets?" Lieutenant Lisa Hayes, standing just behind Blake, stiffened. Her fingers twitched toward the datapad at her belt, where Shed already run the simulations. Blake caught her eye and gave the slightest shake of his head. "Not yet." Krell dismissed them with a wave. "The Federation has fought the Vorac for centuries. We know their tactics. They are predictable." Blake exhaled slowly. "And if they're not?" The room fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the resplendent systems seemed to quiet. Vexis recovered first, her tail flicking in irritation. "Then we will adjust. But we do not need human strategies to do so." Blake's comm buzzed. Ensign Morrison's voice crackled through, low and urgent. "Captain, the Defiance is ready. Just say the word." Hayes leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, they're not listening." Blake didn't answer. Instead, he watched as Krell finalized the battle plan, a perfect symmetrical formation, the kind taught in Federation academies for generations. Beautiful, flawless, and utterly predictable. Vexis caught his expression. "Something amusing, Captain?" Blake straightened. "No, Commander, just thinking. About," he met her gaze. "About why Earth never sends warnings." Vexis' scales rippled in confusion, but Blake was already turning away. The meeting was over. The Federation had their plan, and humanity would have theirs. The strategy room of the FSS Resplendent hummed with the low-frequency vibrations of distant warp drives. Lieutenant Lisa Hayes adjusted her uniform collar as she stepped inside, the door sealing behind her with a hiss. The chamber was dim, lit only by the flickering blue holograms of battle simulations projected above the central table. Science Officer Tavek stood at the far end, his crystalline fingers dancing across the interface. The silicoid's body refracted the holographic light, scattering prismatic shards across the walls. He didn't turn as Hayes approached, his voice a dry, grinding whisper. "You are late, Lieutenant." Hayes clenched her jaw. "Apologies. The Federation's security scans take longer when you're human." Tevek's faceted eyes flickered in what might have been annoyance. He gestured to the hologram, a perfect symmetrical formation of Federation ships, their elegant curves arranged in textbook defensive patterns. "Your input was requested for the Vorac engagement, though I fail to see what your species could contribute." Hayes stepped closer, studying the simulation. Red markers flickered at the edges, human fleet positions, labeled non-compliant. She tapped one, expanding the data stream. "You're deploying in a static crescent formation. The Vorac will see that coming from 3 sectors away." Tevek's fingers twitched. It is the approved doctrine. Predictability ensures cohesion. And gets you slaughtered, Hayes muttered. She swiped the hologram, pulling up a recorded battle from the Sirius campaign, human ships breaking formation, feigning retreat, then hammering the Vorac flanks. The simulation marked it with a flashing warning. Deviation unauthorized. Tevek's crystalline ridges flared with irritation. Reckless, your vessels lack the precision of Federation technology. You rely on chaos. Hayes smirked. We call it adaptability. She leaned in, lowering her voice. You ever wonder why Earth never sends warnings before we strike? Before Tafek could respond, the door slid open. Commander Vexis strode in, his Zephyrian crest flaring in disdain. Ah, the human is attempting strategy. His voice dripped with condescension. Admiral Krell wants the final deployment plans. Leave the primitive tactics to your own kind. Hayes held her ground. We fought the Vorac before. They don't think like you. They don't fight like you. Vexis scoffed. And you do. Your species still uses bullets, Lieutenant. Hayes' fingers tightened around her datapad. They work, Tevek intervened, his voice calm but final. The Federation's formations have stood for centuries. We will not risk this engagement on human improvisation. He entered a command, and the hologram shifted, human ship markers vanishing entirely. Your fleet will remain in reserve as support. Hayes exhaled sharply. You're making a mistake. Vexis grinned, his needle like teeth glinting. Well, see. As they left, Hayes lingered. The hologram still displayed the Federation's pristine formations, and the red markers of human ships, now relegated to the edges. She tapped her comm. Captain Blake, they're sidelining us. Blake's voice crackled back, calm but edged with steel. Expected, proceed with the contingency. Hayes nodded, then noticed a file left open on Tevek's terminal. The header read, Human Warfare Doctrine, Unpredictable, Recommend Exclusion from Frontline Operations. She scanned the document, her stomach tightening, page after page of analysis, human tactics dissected, labeled as erratic, dangerous. A footnote caught her eye. Subject species demonstrates predator-like behavior, unsuited for coordinated warfare. Hayes smirked. Damn right. She copied the file, then erased her traces. As she turned to leave, the hologram flickered again, this time showing the Vorac Swarm's last known position, a perfect, predictable arc. Hayes shook her head. They're walking right into it. Outside, the resplendence corridors buzzed with alien chatter. Federation officers moved with effortless grace, their confidence unshaken. None of them noticed the human lieutenant slipping away, her expression unreadable. Back in her quarters, Hayes opened a secure channel. Morrison were a go, prepped the Defiance for silent running. Ensign Morrison's voice was tight with anticipation. They'll never see us coming. Hayes closed the link, staring at the stolen file. The Federation had dismissed humanity as reckless, primitive. She couldn't wait to prove them wrong. The War Council chamber hummed with the low-frequency vibrations of the FSS Resplendence engines, the organic walls pulsing faintly with bioluminescent light. Admiral Krell's chitinous fingers tapped impatiently against the command console, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic display of the Vorac Swarm fleet's approach. Captain Blake stood off to the side, his human frame looking almost comically small, next to the towering Vorac admiral. Your suggestions are noted, Captain, Krell said, the translator rendering his mandible clicks into standard with deliberate condescension. But the Federation's defensive formations have stood for 600 cycles. We will hold the line at Voroth's gravity well. Blake's jaw tightened. He'd spent the last hour explaining why the Vorac would anticipate the Federation's textbook, perfect defensive grid, how they'd already adapted to counter it in 3 previous engagements, how the human fleet could... With all due respect, Admiral, Blake said, keeping his voice level. The Vorac have cracked your encryption. They know your formations down to the meter. If we don't, Commander Vexis cut him off with a derisive hiss. If we deviate from doctrine, we invite chaos. The Vorac thrive on disorder. your species' improvisational tendencies would play into their claws. Across the room, Ensign Jake Morrison clenched his fists. He'd been running the numbers in his head since they'd arrived. The Federation's ships were faster, more advanced, but they moved like pieces on a board, predictable and rigid. The Vorac had been slaughtering them for months because of it. The hologram flickered. Red icons bloomed across the display as the Vorac Swarm fleet emerged from warp. Not at the predicted coordinates, not in the expected formation. Krell's carapace rattled. Impossible. Thousands of jagged insectoid ships poured into the system, their formations fluid and adaptive. They didn't attack the Federation's front line. They flowed around it, splitting into fractal strike groups that bypassed the heavy cruisers entirely. "Admiral," a Zeperian tactical officer shouted, "they're hitting our support fleet. Our logistics ships are..." The hologram lit up with explosions. Federation vessels died in perfect formation, their commanders too disciplined to break ranks even as the Vorac tore them apart. Krell whirled on Blake. "Where are your ships? Your defiance was supposed to reinforce the left flank." Blake didn't answer. He was watching the tactical feed, his eyes locked on a single cluster of human transponders, marked in defiant blue against the sea of red. The USN Defiance and her escort fleet weren't where they were supposed to be. Neither were the Vorac. Lieutenant Lisa Hayes exhaled slowly, her fingers dancing across the Defiance's tactical console. The ship was dark, running silent in the debris field of a long dead moon. No active scans, no engine signatures. Just cold metal and patience. "Vorac command ship is in range," Ensign Morrison whispered, as if the aliens could hear them through the void. "They haven't spotted us." Hayes smirked. "Why would they? We're not emitting, not moving, just another piece of scrap in the graveyard." On the main screen, the Vorac Hive Commander's flagship loomed, a monstrous spiked leviathan surrounded by its brood. It had taken position exactly where Hayes had predicted, exactly where human intelligence had said it would. "Captain's orders were clear," Hayes said. "We don't fire until they commit to the Federation line. Let them think they've won." Morrison swallowed hard. The Federation fleet was being torn apart. Hundreds of ships, thousands of lives, and they were just waiting. Then it happened. The Vorac command ship pulsed, its biomechanical hull rippling as it signaled the swarm to advance, to finish the Federation remnants. Hayes's fingers flew. All railguns. Fire at will. The Defiance didn't light up with energy signatures, didn't roar with plasma engines. The human warship simply unleashed a storm of tungsten rods hurled at relativistic speeds. No warning, no charging sequence. Just sudden, brutal physics. The Vorac command ship shattered. Its armored carapace meant nothing against kinetic kill vehicles moving at a fraction of light speed. Chunks of chitin and bio, metal spun into the void, trailing frozen E-core. Hive Commander Jorac's final transmission crackled across the comms, his voice a distorted screech of disbelief. They didn't even power weapons. How? Hayes leaned back, watching the Vorac Swarm flounder. Leaderless, confused. "Because we don't play by your rules," she murmured, on the bridge of the FSS Resplendent. Admiral Krell stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. The Vorac advance had stalled, their formations were collapsing, and at the heart of the chaos, a single human warship, its blocky silhouette standing defiant against the swarm. "Where?" Krell demanded, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Are the rest of Blake's ships?" The answer came a second later, from the shadow of Voroth Prime's rings, from the wreckage of derelict freighters, from the blind spots. No Federation tactician would ever consider human vessels emerged. Not in formation, not with precision. With purpose, Blake's voice crackled over the comm, calm and certain. "You wanted predictable, Admiral. We don't do predictable." The Vorac Swarm died screaming. The bridge of the USN Defiance was silent, except for the quiet hum of life support. Captain Ryan Blake stood with his arms crossed, watching the tactical display. The Vorac Swarm had torn through the Federation's perfect formations like a scythe through wheat. Now their jagged ships filled the void, their victory assured. Lieutenant Lisa Hayes leaned over her console, fingers dancing across the controls. All systems dark, Captain, running silent. No active scans, no emissions, just debris and dead metal. Blake nodded. Hold position. Let them think we're just another wreck. Ensign Jake Morrison adjusted his headset, listening to the chatter flooding the comms. Federation ships are scattering, sir. Admiral Krell's flagship is taking heavy fire. They're calling for reinforcements. Blake's jaw tightened. They won't get any. Outside, the Defiance drifted among the shattered hulls of Federation vessels, its angular frame blending into the carnage. The Vorac didn't even glance their way. Why would they? Human ships were small, primitive, not a threat. Commander Vex's voice crackled over the emergency channel, desperation bleeding through. Blake, if you're still alive, we need... Morrison muted the feed. They didn't listen before. Why should we listen now? Hayes smirked. Because we're not them. Blake exhaled. Open a channel to the Defiance's railgun batteries. Silent activation. No power surge. No targeting locks. Manual firing solution only. A series of quiet clicks echoed through the ship as massive kinetic accelerators primed themselves in utter silence. No glowing barrels, no charging hum, just cold, dead metal waiting to unleash hell. On the view screen, the Vorac command ship loomed, its spiked hull bristling with weapons. Hive Commander Jorak's voice boomed across the open frequencies, mocking, "Federation dogs, your time is over, surrender, and we will make your death swift." Blake's fingers curled into fists. Fire. The Defiant shuddered as its railguns discharged. No warning, no energy spike, just hypersonic slugs tearing through the void. The first round punched clean through the Vorac command ship's shields before the aliens even registered the attack. The second shattered its primary reactor. The third split the vessel in half. Jorac's final transmission was a garbled shriek of disbelief. They didn't even power weapons. How? Then his ship exploded, lighting up the battlefield like a dying star. Chaos erupted across the Vorac fleet. Ships veered wildly, their formations collapsing as they scrambled to find the unseen attacker. But the Defiance was already moving, sliding behind the wreckage of a Federation cruiser, its railguns cycling again. Hayes grinned. They're panicking. No coordination, no discipline, just a swarm without its queen. Blake allowed himself a cold smile. Good. Let's remind them why Earth doesn't send warnings. Another volley. Another Vorac ship torn apart. The aliens fired blindly, their energy weapons lashing out at shadows, but the Defiance was already gone, slipping into the debris field like a ghost. Morrison whooped as another enemy vessel detonated. They can't even see us. Blake's voice was steel. Because they weren't looking for a fight, they were looking for prey. The Vorac fleet was unraveling, ships collided in their haste to retreat. Some fired on their own, mistaking allies for the invisible predator, picking them apart. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the Defiance's guns fell silent. Hayes frowned. Captain, why are we stopping? Blake watched the scattering remnants of the Vorac armada. Because they're broken, and I want them to take a message back to the rest of their kind. Morrison tilted his head. What message? Blake turned away from the view screen. That humans don't play by their rules. The bridge fell quiet again. The only sound the distant echoes of dying ships. Somewhere out there, Admiral Krell and the Federation remnants were watching, stunned. And for the first time in galactic history, the universe remembered what it meant to fear humanity. The bridge of the FSS Resplendent was silent, except for the occasional beep of damaged systems. Admiral Krell's 4 hands gripped the command console so tightly the bioluminescent panels beneath his claws flickered. His compound eyes reflected the tactical display. Dozens of Federation ships reduced to floating wreckage, their elegant organic hulls torn open by Vorac plasma lances. Commander Vexis stood rigid beside him, her frilled neck crest flattened in distress. "The swarm's breaking through our last defensive line," she reported, voice strained. "Their numbers." "I see the numbers," Krell snapped. His mandibles twitched as he watched another Federation cruiser explode under concentrated fire. The Vorac weren't just winning. They were dismantling centuries of Federation tactical doctrine piece by piece. A proximity alert blared. The sensor officer's voice shook. "Admiral, Vorac command ship Dreadclaw is moving into firing position. They're targeting our engines." Krell's claws flexed. Without engines, the Resplendent would be dead in the water. An easy kill for the swarm's boarding parties. He opened his mouth to order evasive maneuvers. He knew wouldn't work when the sensor officer suddenly straightened. "Wait, energy spike." "No, not energy, kinetic signatures." The view screen flickered for 3 heartbeats. Nothing happened. Then space itself seemed to ripple as a storm of tungsten rods streaked past the Resplendent at relativistic speeds. They struck the Dreadclaw head, on punching through its chitinous armor like paper. Secondary explosions tore the Vorac flagship apart from the inside, its jagged hull splitting open in a silent fireball. Vexis gasped. "What, Admiral?" The comms officer's voice cut through the shock. "We're receiving a transmission from the USN Defiance." Krell whirled. "Put it through," static crackled. Then Captain Blake's voice filled the bridge, calm as if discussing the weather. "Resplendent, this is Defiance. Suggest you fall back to Rally Point Gamma. We'll handle cleanup." The view screen shifted to an external feed. There, drifting amidst the debris, was the blocky human warship, its railgun batteries still smoking. As they watched, its missile pods opened, unleashing a swarm of unguided slugs. No targeting locks, no energy signatures. Just brute, force physics turning space into a killing field. Vorac ships died by the dozen. Their point defense systems useless against weapons that didn't need guidance systems. A swarm destroyer tried to evade too late. A tungsten rod the size of a ground car smashed through its bridge, exiting the other side in a spray of molten debris. Vexis's frills stood straight up. They're butchering them. On screen, Blake's face appeared, his expression unreadable. "You wanted predictable. Admiral, we don't do predictable." Krell's mandibles clicked in agitation behind him. The tactical display updated. Human ships were emerging from stealth all across the battlefield. Not just the Defiance, but dozens of vessels. Each one positioned exactly where the Vorac least expected. They struck without warning, without ceremony. No grand formations, no honored duels, just cold, brutal efficiency. A silicoid analyst near the back of the bridge suddenly spoke up, its crystalline voice tinged with something like awe. "They're using the wreckage as cover, and the Vorac's own sensor ghosts against them. This isn't just tactics. It is predation." Krell watched as a human frigate, its hull scorched black from near, misses deliberately drifted into the path of a Vorac cruiser. At the last second, it spun sideways, revealing a full broadside of railguns. The cruiser didn't even have time to scream before it was reduced to scrap. Blake's voice came through again. "Admiral, if you've got any ships still combat ready, now's the time to push. The swarm's command structure is in pieces. They won't recover from this." Vexis turned to Krell, her crest quivering. "Sir, the humans, they knew this would happen. They let the Vorac engage us first." Krell didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the tactical feed, where human ships moved like wolves among sheep. No grandstanding, no heroic last stands. Just the swarm dying, ship by ship, in perfect silence. Finally, he activated the fleet-wide comm. "All Federation vessels fall back to Rally Point Gamma. Let the humans finish their work." As the Resplendent turned away, Krell caught one last glimpse of the Defiance, its railguns cycling for another volley, its hull streaked with battle damage, but otherwise unbroken. For the first time in his long military career, the Admiral felt something unfamiliar. It might have been fear, or maybe, just maybe, it was respect. The Federation debriefing chamber hummed with subdued energy, its curved walls lined with holographic projectors, replaying the battle in excruciating detail. Lieutenant Lisa Hayes stood at parade rest, her hands clasped behind her back as Science Officer Tvek's crystalline fingers manipulated the playback. The alien's faceted eyes reflected the shifting battle lines, his usual air of superiority replaced by something Hayes couldn't quite place. Deviation from doctrine, the hologram announced in crisp galactic standard, as it highlighted the USN Defiance's sudden pivot during the engagement. Another marker appeared. Deviation from doctrine. Then another, and another. Tvek's voice was uncharacteristically quiet. Your vessel executed 17 separate maneuvers, not catalogued in any Federation tactical database. Hayes allowed herself a small smirk. We improvise. The hologram zoomed in on the Defiance's railgun strike, the one that had shattered the Vorac command ship. The playback showed no energy spike, no weapon signature, just the sudden, brutal impact of tungsten rods moving at relativistic speeds. Tvek's crystalline body rippled with what might have been unease. You didn't power your weapons until the instant of firing. Old habit, Hayes said. If they can't see you coming, they can't stop you. Tvek manipulated the controls, rewinding to the moment the Defiance had drifted silently in the debris field. The hologram highlighted the ship's heat signature, barely above background radiation. Your thermal output was negligible. How? Hayes shrugged. We shut down non-essentials, life support, artificial gravity, even most of the lights. Crew wore cold suits, not comfortable, but effective. A new marker flashed on the hologram. The Defiance's sudden acceleration directly into the Vorac flank. Deviation from doctrine. Tvek's voice tightened. This maneuver risked catastrophic hull stress. No species in the Federation would attempt it. Hayes' smirk widened. We reinforced the frame, figured we'd need to pull some hard turns. The hologram shifted to the aftermath, the wreckage of the Vorac fleet, torn apart by ambushes and traps the Federation hadn't even recognized as such until it was too late. Tvek stared at the carnage, his crystalline form flickering with refracted light. You fight like predators, he murmured. Hayes met his gaze. We fight to win. Across the chamber, Commander Vexis stood rigid, her bioluminescent stripes pulsing erratically. She had dismissed human tactics as primitive. Now she watched as those same tactics had saved the Federation fleet. Her mandibles twitched, but she said nothing. Admiral Krell's voice rumbled from the shadows. Your vessel sustained minimal damage. Hayes nodded. We don't like getting hit. Krell stepped into the light, his massive Vorac frame towering over her. Your captain refused direct orders to fall back. He saw an opportunity. And if he had been wrong, Hayes didn't blink. He wasn't. Silence settled over the chamber. The hologram continued its playback, marking yet another human deviation from Federation doctrine. Tvek finally shut it off, the room dimming as the projections faded. Krell's mandibles flexed. Your species does not fight as we do. Hayes allowed herself a small, knowing smile. No, we don't. The Admiral turned to the Federation officers gathered around the chamber. Review every human engagement in our archives. I want to know what else we've missed. Vexis stiffened. Admiral, their methods are effective, Krell interrupted. That is all that matters now. Hayes kept her expression neutral, but inside she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Federation had dismissed humanity as reckless, unpredictable, too primitive to trust with frontline operations. Now, they were scrambling to understand what they'd ignored. Tvek approached her as the debriefing wound down. Your vessel's actions were unconventional. Hayes chuckled. You mean we didn't follow the script? The silicoid hesitated, then dipped his crystalline head in what might have been respect. You rewrote it. Outside the chamber, the stars glittered cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the Defiance was already preparing for its next mission. Hayes allowed herself one last glance at the tactical displays, now littered with markers of human ingenuity, before following Tvek into the corridor. The Federation had its doctrines, humanity had its results, and today, Results had spoken louder than rules. The USN Defiance hung in the void, its battered hull still glowing faintly from the heat of battle. Scorch marks streaked across its angular frame. But the ship held firm, a silent testament to human engineering. Inside the bridge, Captain Ryan Blake leaned back in his command chair, watching the tactical feed as the last Vorac ships fled into warp. All enemy vessels have disengaged. Ensign Morrison reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. Federation fleet is regrouping. Blake nodded. Send our damage reports to the Resplendent and tell Admiral Krell we're standing down. Across the debris-strewn battlefield, the Federation flagship loomed, its bioluminescent hull flickering with damage alerts. Inside its command chamber, Admiral Krell stood motionless, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic replay of the battle. The Vorac had been decimated, not by superior firepower, but by something far more unsettling, human unpredictability. Commander Vexis approached, his usually smooth carapace marred by stress fractures. The humans, they didn't follow a single doctrine. No formations, no energy signatures before firing, just chaos. Krell finished, mandibles twitching. Controlled chaos. The hologram replayed the Defiance's ambush, drifting silently in the wreckage, weapons cold until the Vorac command ship passed within point-blank range. Then, without warning, the human railguns had torn through the enemy flagship like paper. No pre-firing sequence, no power spikes, just sudden, brutal efficiency. Krell exhaled sharply, a sound like grinding stone. Get me Captain Blake. On the Defiance, Blake accepted the incoming transmission. The Admiral's image flickered to life, his usually imperious posture slightly slumped. You knew, Krell said without preamble. Blake raised an eyebrow. Knew what? That the Vorac would target our command ships first. That they'd ignore your vessels because we marked you as non-compliant. A slow smirk tugged at Blake's lips. We are non-compliant, just not in the way you thought. Krell's mandibles flexed. Your entire strategy was built on deception, on letting the enemy underestimate you. Lieutenant Hayes, standing at Blake's side, couldn't suppress a grin. Works every time. The Admiral fell silent. The tactical feed still played behind him, human ships striking from blind spots, using debris as cover, feigning retreats only to circle back and cripple Vorac reinforcements. Every move defied Federation doctrine. Every move had been perfect. You fight like predators, Krell finally said. Blake's smile faded. No, we fight like humans. 3 cycles later, in the Federation's Central Archives, Science Officer Tvek reviewed the newly revised combat assessment files. The old entry for Homo sapiens had been replaced. No longer labeled unpredictable, recommend exclusion. It now read, adaptive tactical superiority, observe and learn before engagement. Tvek's crystalline fingers traced the words. Beside him, Lieutenant Hayes watched, arms crossed. Happy? She asked. The silicoid emitted a low harmonic hum, the equivalent of a sigh. You could have warned us. Hayes laughed. Where's the fun in that? As the Defiance prepared to depart Vorac Prime, Admiral Krell stood on the observation deck of the Resplendent, watching the human ship power up its engines. The angular vessel looked crude compared to the Federation's organic designs, but after today, no one would call it weak. His comm buzzed. Admiral, a subordinate said, the Council requests your presence. They want to discuss restructuring our military protocols. Krell didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the Defiance as it turned toward the jump point. Tell them I'll be there shortly, he said. Then, quieter to himself, next time, we listen. The human ship vanished into warp. Silence settled over the battlefield. But the lesson lingered.